It's Manager Critic Monday, and for those who don't know me, I'm listening detective Cheryl Andrews, and I help you do more of what you love and ditch the critic that says you can't. And I primarily do that by helping you get clarity of what you want and the confidence to either ask for it or to make it happen, i.e. take the action that's required. But over the years of listening to people, what I've come to realise is it often comes down to changing the way that you give, receive and invite feedback. In particular, the feedback you give yourself. However, today I want to talk about the subject of co-pilot versus backseat driver. Sometimes the feedback we give ourselves or each other can come from a place of genuinely supportive, resourceful, helpful, and other times the feedback we give ourselves can be from a place of contempt or criticism. And the reason I'm bringing this to you, those of you know that Mark and I, my husband, are busy on a DIY project right now where we're building a new shower. I say we, and I am aware that somebody else on Facebook laughed and said, oh, I like the fact that you're helping your husband. So I'm aware that I have a little bit of angst going on, a little bit of contempt, a little bit of drama, a little bit cheesed off inside. So I want to bring this to you, but my purpose of sharing it with you is I want you to think about when you're doing something that's unfamiliar, that's something that's taking you outside your comfort zone, something that's going to require change. There's a part of your brain called the mammalian brain that effectively is checking for what the rules are. How do we do things around here? And so that part of the brain loves to pattern spot and predict what's going to happen next. And it's also checking that you're safe. So when things change, the mammalian brain can get a bit unsettled because it's like, I thought we were doing it this way and now we're doing it this way. Good morning, whoever's just joining, please say hello in the bottom. If you haven't given StreamYard your permission, please pop your name so I know who's talking. Lovely to have you here. So we're just talking about that when you're giving yourself feedback, the impact that it has on your system. But noticing when you are feeling a bit unsettled and agitated is really worthwhile. So here's a good example. So what agitated me is, one, I've put a post out about the DIY and I said, I'm helping my husband with the DIY. And somebody has just put, it's somebody I know, love, trust, there's no contempt. It's just humour. But it's left me with this kind of like, feeling. And I know why, and I'll tell you about that in a minute. But if you ever get that thing when someone says something and it leaves you with this horrible feeling inside, this kind of icky feeling, then I want to share with you some things about that. So the person said, oh, I like it how you're saying that I'm helping my husband with the DIY. So what I inferred from that is that they thought I wasn't really helping. My husband's doing the DIY and I was just making out that I was helping. And the impact was I felt a bit cheesed off and a bit like my part didn't really count and that what I was doing wasn't really very worthwhile. So that happened, I think, last weekend. And then on Sunday, I was watching Mark do the tiling. I just literally sat down and brought him a cup of coffee in and I was chatting with him about what's going, how's he getting on. I had been busy doing some other stuff in the rest of the house. And I wasn't really helping, I wasn't doing anything physically. And there was a bit of tile bare without any adhesive on it. And I just said, oh, there's a bit down the corner there. And he went, oh, you've got to love a backseat driver. Now, generally speaking, that would have gone over my head. But because of this other comment about me not really helping, well, that's what I inferred, I made up about it. And then this one, I was like, oh, I felt a bit sort of like my part wasn't being acknowledged. Now, here's the interesting thing. If you're a manager, if you're a parent, if you're a really good friend, if you're a coach, a counsellor, therapist, if your role involves listening to support people, it can often become this kind of invisible thing that people don't see and don't acknowledge as part of the process of change. So I often work with managers and they've spent their whole day in meetings listening to members of their team, motivating and encourage them, and they get to the end of the day and they haven't actually done anything off of their to-do list. So my thing would be to remember that co-pilot role. One of the roles of a co-pilot is you've got somebody else who is checking what is happening, verbalizing their observations, and you're collaborating on getting to the destination. Now, you might have the pilot is the one that's flying the actual aeroplane, but the co-pilot is the support and the backup if that pilot can't. But they don't just sit there waiting till they're needed. They have a purpose. They're checking the instruments, they're giving feedback, they're noticing things. Equally, if you've, police cars where they're driving at high speed, there's people observing stuff. And the point of the observing and giving feedback is to be supportive. Now, my role in the DIY has mostly been sounding board. When Mark's been learning something new, we've been watching YouTube videos, and then he's translating what he's heard and he's putting it on there. And when it's not quite going how he expected it to go, we go back and we watch the video again, and I'm saying, well, what I'm noticing is this, and he's noticing, he's like, oh yeah. And so I haven't had to physically do anything. I made a cup of tea, I've made sure there's food been there, I've run to tool station and got parts that he's needed so he can carry on working. But my primary role has been listening. And so when he says, right, one of the things I've got to do is this, and then I see him doing something that's different, our partnership is based on the fact that my role is to just check with him, right, you said you want to do this and you're now doing this, can I just check, is that a conscious decision to change what you're doing, or have you got on autopilot? Now, a good example, and this happens with lots of stuff, not just DIY, but he was measuring something and he said 9 centimeters, and I just said, can I just check, did you mean 9 centimeters or 9 millimeters? Because he was saying one thing and then doing another. Another case, it was 9 centimeters, but it's actually 19. So obviously the 10 was there, and he was measuring this 9 and checking the odd bit. And so my thing was to reflect back what he's actually saying and checking that's what he's actually doing. Now, every time that he's come to me, during this process, I've been working, and he would go, can I just check with you? And I'm his sounding board and his sanity check, and then I go in and I'm checking things with him. What happened yesterday was I wasn't doing it with him, and it wasn't him asking me for the help. I went in and I was noticing something. I was actually asking questions, not because he needed it, because he was quite happy doing it, but I was actually just wanting to learn how he was doing it and why he was doing it. Partly because I like to know what he's doing and how he's doing it, so that if he gets stuck and he comes and asks me later on, at least I've got a rough idea what the purpose behind the process was, and I can question it. So I just want you to think about, when you are going through a change process, when you're learning something new, first of all, how do you need to be able to learn? And when other people try to help you, when they ask you questions or they give you feedback or they say something to you, what is the impact when you're in the middle of the learning stage? Now, definitely for Mark yesterday, he was becoming aware that we were not going to hit the deadline of getting the tiling finished by the time we thought. So he was much more likely to be in a stress state, not because he couldn't do the tiling, because that bit he's quite confident with now, but it was more to do with, was he going to reach it on time? And then I've come in and said something that, by asking the question, might have meant that had he got it wrong, or I didn't like it the way it was, or whatever, that he'd have to redo something, which would have then meant he would be even more likely to be behind. So the question I asked him was more about, it was coming from my curiosity, but he already had self-talk about time that was going on. So thinking about yourself, do you know how you need to be able to learn something new, to go through change? And do you Hello, sorry about that. We seem to have lost our internet, so hopefully we're okay. There's been a bit of a pause, I think, there. So just thinking about how do you need to be to go through change and support, and how do you need, what kind of resource and support do you need, and more importantly, can you ask for it? And probably the next bit is, if the person gives you the support that you've asked for, because in your head you thought, oh, what I need is, but then they give it to you and it doesn't work, do you have that partnership where you can work out what needs to change? Because often what happens when we go through this support structure is that what we think we need isn't it. And we don't know that though until we actually receive it and we get the feedback from our system. And what used to work may not work today. So up until this point, I'd been asking questions, I'd been checking with him, but something changed yesterday where he went from feeling like we were a co-pilot and we're working on it together to I was being a backseat driver and I was criticising what he was doing. And for me, predominantly, when I look at what changed, the main thing was he was now onto an area that he wasn't trying to learn. He's done tiling before, he's quite confident. So he was confident with what he's doing. So he wasn't coming to me for discussion anymore. So the big change was I came in and started asking questions, not because he wanted that support. So it was uninvited feedback. But predominantly, this is our bathroom and we've looked at the design. And therefore, I was just checking because we're human and so is he. And he will make mistakes and he will cut things too short. And it might not be quite how it wants to be. And therefore, up until that point on this sort of 3-week, 4-week project we've been on, I've been his sanity board, and then suddenly he didn't really want it and didn't invite it. So I went from being called a co-pilot to being a backseat driver. We've laughed about it since, and he's absolutely, it's just one of those moments, it passed and it went. But I see it so often happening with people when they get stuck, they need help. But then when they ask for help, the kind of help they get doesn't work. And then when that help doesn't work, then you feel like you can't ask anybody for help. So then you get in a bind and you get really, really stuck. So I want you to think about, one of the things you can do is get clarity of what kind of help you want and what works for you. Hope that's been useful for you today. I'll speak to you again in the week. See you on Friday. Bye. Have a great week.